when it's on the page, and you have guys like Kurt Russell and Bill Paxton and Val Kilmer. The cast in that film alone, all of them, and a lot of them are gone today.
Every few years, someone puts together a list of the greatest westerns ever filmed, and almost without fail, one 1993 movie about a lawman, his brothers, and a gambler with a bad cough sits somewhere near the top. Audiences quote it constantly. Actors study it. Fans can recite entire scenes from memory without even trying. But there is a piece of this film's history that rarely makes it into the retrospectives, the anniversary specials, or the highlight reels. A piece that only fully comes into focus once you listen closely to what one particular actor said, decades apart, in two very different interviews. That actor is Sam Elliott. And what he understood about this movie, what he tried to protect on set, and quietly admitted to reporters years later, reframes the entire film. This is not simply a story about a beloved Western. It is a story about a movie that very nearly wasn't what we remember it as, and about the one man in the cast who saw that happening in real time and refused to let it go without a fight. To understand why what happened on this set mattered so much, you have to go back to where Hollywood stood on Westerns at the start of the 1990s. The genre that had once dominated American cinema, that had made stars out of John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, that had filled Saturday matinees for generations, had all but vanished from theaters. Studios considered it a financial graveyard. Audiences, executives assumed, had moved on to other kinds of stories entirely. Getting a major studio to greenlight a big-budget period Western in this climate was already an uphill battle. Into that skeptical environment walked a screenwriter with an outsized reputation and an even bigger vision. He had already proven himself capable of handling sweeping historical material, having earned acclaim for a Civil War drama that captured critical attention and awards recognition. Now he wanted to tackle the story of Wyatt Earp, his brothers, and the gunfight that would echo through American folklore for more than a century. But he wasn't interested in a stripped-down, simplified version of the legend. He wanted texture. He wanted history. He wanted a script dense enough with character and detail that it read less like a typical action picture and more like a sprawling frontier saga. That ambition is exactly what pulled in one of the most remarkable casts assembled for a Western in decades. A leading man known for tough, grounded performances signed on to play Wyatt Earp. An actor with a reputation for intensity and unpredictability took the role of Doc Holliday, the tubercular gunslinger and gambler whose loyalty to Earp would become the emotional spine of the film. A rugged, deep-voiced veteran actor was cast as Virgil Earp, the eldest of the Earp brothers and, in many ways, the moral anchor of the family. Around them assembled a supporting cast, stacked with recognizable faces, actors who would go on to have long, celebrated careers, all drawn to a script that promised something rare, a Western with real weight behind it. There's a detail about this production that even devoted fans sometimes miss. The writer behind this ambitious screenplay wasn't simply handing his script off to someone else to direct. He intended to direct it himself. This would be his debut behind the camera, a chance to bring his own sprawling vision to life exactly as he had imagined it on the page. Before filming even began, the writer-turned-director had already set an extraordinarily high bar for authenticity. He insisted that his actors grow real, period-accurate facial hair, rather than relying on prosthetics or fake mustaches glued on for each shoot day. These weren't just any mustaches either. They had to be carefully shaped and waxed to mirror the elaborate styles common among men in the 1880s American frontier. It might sound like a minor production detail, but it became something the cast took genuine pride in. Growing and maintaining those mustaches turned into a shared ritual, a physical symbol that everyone involved was fully committed to honoring the period and the story. It reflected something larger about the entire approach to the project. This wasn't going to be a stylized modern take on the Old West. It was going to feel real. That obsession with authenticity ran through every page of the original script too. It wasn't just about facial hair. It was about giving each character room to breathe, giving relationships time to develop, giving the audience a sense of a fully lived-in world rather than a series of shootouts strung together. The cast responded to that ambition. They weren't just showing up to make another cowboy movie. Many of them believed they were part of something that could stand alongside the finest historical dramas ever put to film. Then the production began to unravel. Directing a massive, logistically complicated period Western with hundreds of extras, live horses, elaborate gunfight choreography, and an ensemble cast spread across a demanding shooting schedule turned out to be an entirely different challenge than writing one. The first-time director found himself falling behind almost immediately. Days that should have wrapped on schedule stretched long into the evening. Shots he needed weren't coming together fast enough. There are accounts suggesting he wanted to shoot in the patient, painterly style associated with classic Western filmmakers of an earlier generation, lingering wide shots, carefully composed frames, but that approach simply could not keep pace with a production burning through money and daylight at an alarming rate. The studio and the production's financial backer grew increasingly alarmed. Barely a month into principal photography, with the shoot already in serious trouble, the decision came down. The writer who had dreamed up this entire project, who had fought to get it made, who was supposed to direct his own vision from start to finish, was removed from the director's chair. At that moment, the production stood on the edge of total collapse. Cast members were unsettled and frustrated. The crew was fractured, unsure what came next. There was no director, a partially shot film, mounting costs, and a schedule that refused to wait. Many productions in this exact position simply fall apart entirely, quietly shelved and never completed. This one very nearly did. What happened next is one of the more remarkable stories to come out of a major studio production, and it stayed hidden from the public for over a decade. The studio brought in a replacement director, an experienced hand best known for high-octane action films rather than character-driven period pieces. For years, moving forward, this was simply understood as fact. He was the director of the film. His name appeared in the credits, and that was that. Film history books and casual conversations alike treated it as settled. But it wasn't the whole truth. Years after the film's release, the actor who played Wyatt Earp gave an interview to a Western history publication and revealed what had actually happened behind the scenes. According to his account, when the original director was let go, he was the one who effectively took over. He had personal skin in the game beyond just his performance. He had helped secure a substantial chunk of the film's roughly $25 million budget himself, putting his own reputation and relationships on the line to get the financing in place. So when the production needed someone to steer it forward, the producers turned to him. He declined to take the director's credit publicly. He didn't want his name attached to that title. Instead, he proposed an unusual arrangement, bringing in the veteran action director as the public face of the production, the man who would stand on set, call action, and appear in every official capacity as the film's director, while the actual planning and shot-by-shot decision-making happened somewhere else entirely. Every night during the remainder of the shoot, according to this account, the two men would meet privately. The actor would walk through exactly what needed to be filmed the next day, which scenes, which angles, which approach to each sequence, and hand that plan over. The next morning, the credited director would step onto set and execute exactly what had been laid out the night before, presenting it publicly as his own directorial work. The actor made one condition clear: he would never speak publicly about the arrangement while the other man was alive. He kept that promise for years. It was only after the credited director passed away in 2005 that the full story finally came out, told candidly in that magazine interview roughly a year later. Interestingly, the idea to bring in that particular action film veteran reportedly came from another major Hollywood star entirely, a friend and colleague who suggested him for the role of on-set frontman. This detail matters enormously for understanding what Sam Elliott was up against. When the lead actor of a film is secretly the one steering its creative direction, quietly reshaping scenes, restructuring the story, making calls that would normally belong to a credited director, the rest of the cast faces a choice. They can go along with the changes being made, trusting that the person now effectively running the show has a plan worth following, or they can push back. Almost everyone chose to go along with it. One person did not, and that single act of resistance is central to understanding what this film actually is. Once the actor playing Wyatt Earp had effectively taken creative control, he confronted a hard truth. The original screenplay, for all its richness, was simply too big. Too many subplots, too many characters given significant screen time, too much story to shoot with the time and money that remained after the chaotic first month. So the cutting began. Working alongside one of the film's producers, he and the production stripped roughly 30 pages out of the screenplay. Entire subplots that had been carefully built into the original draft were removed. Supporting characters who had substantial arcs in the writer's original vision, played by well-known young actors of the era, were reduced to minor presences. A handful of lines where there had once been full storylines, even a major set piece from history. The extended pursuit sequence following the shootout, which had been written as a sprawling multi-part section of the script, was compressed down into something closer to a fast-moving montage. There was a clear philosophy behind these cuts. The actors steering the production wanted the film to zero in on one relationship above all others: the bond between Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. He would later describe that friendship as one of the great connections ever portrayed on screen between two men, complicated, largely unspoken, forged in violence, but deeply loyal underneath it all. To make that central relationship land with real force, he believed, everything peripheral needed to shrink. To his credit, he didn't spare his own role from the trims. Accounts from the production describe him actively pushing lines away from his own character and toward others, telling the original writer, who was still involved in rewriting pages even after losing the director's chair, to redistribute dialogue to supporting characters. He wanted an ensemble film, not a star vehicle built entirely around himself. The actor playing Doc Holliday reportedly went even further, telling his co-star he could cut any of his own lines if it served the film, confident that his performance would still leave a mark regardless of how much dialogue he was given. Across the cast, this spirit of sacrifice held. Actors who had come aboard because of the depth and richness of the original script now watched substantial portions of their characters get trimmed away, and largely, they accepted it. They kept working through brutal heat on location, giving up screen time to keep the larger production alive. Nearly everyone went along with the sacrifice. Nearly everyone. Sam Elliott played Virgil Earp, the eldest of the Earp brothers, the character most identified with a sense of duty and moral clarity, the man who ultimately pins on a badge in an attempt to bring order to a lawless town. As the cutting continued around him, as colleague after colleague quietly accepted the loss of scenes and dialogue, Elliott drew a line he would not budge from. By multiple accounts of the production, while the rest of the ensemble willingly gave up material, with Val Kilmer even offering to sacrifice his own lines wholesale, Sam Elliott made it unmistakably clear that his dialogue was not up for negotiation. He reportedly told those involved, in characteristically blunt terms, that anyone who touched his lines would regret it. He was, by every available account, the sole cast member who flatly refused to give up material from his role. It's tempting to read that as simple ego, the kind of gruff posturing that sometimes flares up on a stressed, overheated film set, and there was probably some of that tension baked into how it played out in the moment. But underneath the bravado was something far more sincere, and it's the key to understanding what Elliott actually grasped about this production that so many people watching the finished film never picked up on. Elliott had read Kevin Jarre's original screenplay in full before a single page had been cut, and he considered it exceptional. In an interview given while the film was still fresh, conducted with Entertainment Weekly around the time of its 1993 release, Elliott stated plainly that the original screenplay, as it existed before revisions, ranked among the finest scripts he had ever encountered in his career. Then he said something that ought to stop any longtime fan of this movie in their tracks. He said that had the script he actually ended up shooting, the trimmed, restructured 30 pages lighter version, been the one he was handed initially, before ever committing to the project, he likely would have turned the role down entirely. Sit with that for a moment. The actor whose portrayal of Virgil Earp has become one of the most respected performances in the film, whose gravel-voiced authority helped anchor the entire cast, is on record saying that the movie audiences actually got would not have been enough to convince him to sign on in the first place. To him, The finished film represented a diminished version of something far richer that he had glimpsed and fallen for on the page. Elliott described what was lost using a phrase that captures it well: connective tissue, the character development, the quieter beats, the material that let audiences understand who these people were beyond the gunfights that, he felt, is what had been carved away. Somewhere around 29 pages of that connective tissue never made it to the screen, and to Elliott, that missing material represented the difference between a very good Western and something closer to a masterpiece. There's a reason this cut so deep for him personally. Virgil Earp was one of the characters most affected by the trimming. In Jarre's original vision, Virgil functioned as the true moral center of the Earp family, the older brother whose sense of right and wrong is what ultimately pushes his siblings toward taking up their badges and confronting the outlaws terrorizing the town. A great deal of the quieter material that would have fleshed Virgil into a fully three-dimensional man, scenes exploring his convictions, his relationships, his internal sense of duty, fell victim to exactly the kind of trimming a production does when it needs to move faster and cost less. So when Sam Elliott planted his feet and refused to let his remaining lines be touched, he wasn't simply protecting his own screen time out of vanity. He was making one last stand for the character he had fallen in love with on the page, and for the fuller, slower, more richly human film character belonged to a film that, in his eyes, was already slipping away scene by scene, page by page, all around him. That tension between a lead actor secretly steering the production toward something leaner and more emotionally concentrated, and a supporting actor fighting to preserve the depth and detail of the writer's original sprawling vision, runs quietly beneath the surface of every frame that made it to theaters. Here's where the story becomes genuinely poignant, because Sam Elliott was far from alone in sensing that something extraordinary had been lost along the way. The very actor who had led the charge on cutting the script, the same man who spent years keeping his role as secret creative director hidden from the public, has spent decades since wrestling with what was left on the cutting room floor. In that same 2006 interview, where he finally revealed the truth about the ghost directing arrangement, he made a striking comparison. He described Kevin Jarre's original unedited vision for the film as essentially a Western version of The Godfather, a sprawling, generational, richly plotted crime epic just relocated to the dusty streets of 1880s Arizona instead of mid-century New York. He wasn't alone in that assessment. Another cast member who played one of the film's key antagonists echoed the same sentiment, describing the original screenplay in strikingly similar terms, a Godfather-caliber story transplanted into the American frontier, and calling it simply, that good. Think about the weight of that claim. The people who actually lived through this production, who read every page of the original script and watched it get whittled down in real time, believed they had been sitting on something that could have stood shoulder to shoulder